I never imagined that at 78 years old, I would find myself abandoned like a piece of driftwood in a foreign land. My dignity stripped away with the same ease one discards a worn-out garment. And yet, here I am, sitting on a green plastic chair in a small, humid police station in Cartagena, Colombia, trying to convince myself that I haven't completely lost my mind. The air smells of stale coffee, sweat, and a faint hint of disinfectant. But my senses are overwhelmed by the stench of fear, shame, and salt. Salt from the sea that betrayed me. It all began 2 days ago aboard the Star of the Caribbean, a cruise ship I had chosen for what was supposed to be a simple, joyful holiday with my children and their spouses. A celebration, a time to create memories with my family before I drifted further into the twilight of my life. The sun was bright, the sea calm, and I felt the warmth of my grandson Mason's small hand in mine. At 12 years old, he was still a child, but the depth in his eyes often betrayed the wisdom he had no business possessing. He hugged me tightly on the deck, whispered softly, almost in secret, "Grandpa, I don't want you to go to the port tomorrow." I laughed, dismissing the warning. "Why not, kiddo? It'll be fun. We'll see the market, buy some souvenirs." I ruffled his hair, messy as always, and watched him run off to play. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Children say strange things all the time. But now, sitting in this plastic chair, I understand. He knew. I knew what was coming, and none of us could stop it. It started innocuously enough. Sarah, my daughter, and Grace, Marcus's wife, insisted I step off the ship to explore the market. "It'll be good for you to stretch your legs," Sarah said, smiling far too brightly. Grace chimed in immediately, the words polished, precise, cold as ice. "Yes, father-in-law, you should go. We'll watch your things here. Don't worry about a thing." I should have sensed the plan, but I was a fool. A man of 84 years of experience in ships, tides, and trade, yet blind to betrayal from my own children. I left my black canvas backpack behind in their cabin, where I kept my passport, wallet with Tone 200, cell phone, and the documents from Josephine's will, things Marcus had entrusted me to protect. I carried only my Panama hat and $50, which I spent on small trinkets for my grandchildren. That decision would haunt me. The ship slipped away while I was in the market, the horizon devouring it as though I had never existed. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely someone would realize I was gone. I wandered the streets of Cartagena in a daze, my feet carrying me over uneven cobblestones, my mind spinning. Shops, vendors, and tourists blurred together as fear gripped me like a vice. My throat had tightened so much that I hadn't swallowed in nearly a day. I could barely move, barely think. The crowd was a stranger, each sound magnified. The clatter of shoes, the cries of street hawkers, the distant hum of the harbor. By nightfall, exhaustion and dehydration had set in. I remembered Mason's eyes, and my heart broke all over again. He had known. He had been powerless, or perhaps too afraid to act. What could a 12-year-old boy do against his parents? And what could I do now against mine? When I finally reached the police station, I felt invisible, like a ghost of the man I used to be. My white linen shirt, once crisp and clean, was stained and wrinkled, the elbows caked in dirt, a coffee stain on the chest that I didn't even remember spilling. My hair was matted, my hands trembling. The officer behind the desk looked at me with suspicion, typing away on an ancient typewriter whose clacks sounded like bones snapping. I tried to explain, but the words caught it in my throat. Was I really here? Was I imagining everything? Then Elena appeared, a local woman, older than me, with short gray hair and large sunglasses she removed as she entered. She had seen me in the market, recognized the chaos, and believed me. For the first time in 2 days, someone saw me as I was. Not a liar, not a beggar, not a madman, but a man wronged, abandoned by the very people who should have loved him unconditionally. She brought my black backpack, my passport, my wallet, and the documents I had been entrusted to protect. She explained that she had witnessed everything, the calculated, precise betrayal, and had come to my aid. The officer's eyes softened, pity giving way to respect. My story would be taken seriously. Contacts would be made with the American embassy, the cruise company, and anyone who could intervene. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, not for my children, they had proven themselves unworthy, but for justice, for dignity, for the ability to show the world, and perhaps myself, that even at 78, an old sea dog still knows how to find his way home. I sat in that chair, feeling the grooves of the hard plastic dig into my skin, and closed my eyes. I remembered standing in front of the empty lot at the Houston port in 1978, the day Josephine and I married. A simple courthouse ceremony, no big wedding, just love and hope for the future. Her father, Mr. Emil Reed, had looked at me with those big, serious hands and few words, weighing me, testing me, seeing if I was worthy of his daughter. At that moment, I had proven myself worthy. Now I had to prove myself again, not to him, not to my children, but to the world. I opened my eyes. The fly crawled lazily along the edge of the window. The typewriter clacked away, relentless, like the beat of my own heart. I was here, I was alive, and I would not be forgotten. 2 days, 48 hours of wandering through a foreign city, of begging for small mercies from a world that seemed indifferent, and my mind still reels with disbelief. How could my own children do this to me? How could Sarah, Marcus, and their spouses orchestrate such a calculated, cruel betrayal? The answers eluded me, but the weight of their actions pressed down like the hull of a ship sinking slowly into the ocean. I remember the morning of the port as though it were etched into my bones. The sun had barely risen, spilling gold over the white decks of the Star of the Caribbean. I had woken to the smell of brewed coffee and fresh toast drifting from the dining room. Mason bounded into my cabin, his hair tousled, eyes wide with excitement and worry. "Grandpa, don't go to the port tomorrow," he whispered, almost a secret confession. I had laughed it off, ruffled his hair, told him it would be fun, but the warmth of his small hand lingered in my mind like a warning I had been too blind to heed. Sarah had smiled that morning, too brightly, a mask of innocence she clearly did not feel. "Dad," she said, her voice sugary sweet, "it's terribly hot today. You should come down to the port with me. Stretch your legs. Enjoy the sun." Grace had jumped in immediately, smooth and polished, her words like ice. "Yes, father-in-law, leave your things here. We'll watch them. Don't worry about a thing." And I believed them. I believed in my family, despite every whisper of doubt my instincts tried to offer. I left behind my black canvas bag, my lifeline, with my passport, wallet, cash, documents from Josephine's will, and my cell phone. I carried only my Panama hat and $50, a trivial amount in a sea of deceit. I wandered through the market at first, marveling at the colors, the smells, the vibrancy of life around me. But then the truth hit me. The distant horn of the ship, the sight of the Star of the Caribbean slowly pulling away from the port, was unmistakable. My stomach sank. My heart thumped painfully against my ribcage. They had left me. They had done this on purpose. It wasn't an accident. It was precise, deliberate, like the calculated movements of a chess master who knows every piece he will capture before the first pawn moves. And I, Julian Morgan Reed, who had spent decades building ships, employing hundreds of men, ensuring families had work, food, and dignity, had been reduced to nothing more than a pawn in their cruel game. The city of Cartagena became a blur. Cobblestones, vendors, children playing, the smell of fried food, the clanging of metal. Everything merged into a chaotic symphony of fear. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only move, step after trembling step, each one taking me further into the nightmare. That first night, exhaustion overcame me. I slept on a bench near the port, trying to shield myself from the stares of curious strangers. My shirt, once crisp linen, now smelled of sweat and dust, wrinkled and stained with coffee from a vendor's cart that had tipped near me. My hands shook uncontrollably. And through the darkness, I saw Mason's face in my mind, eyes wide, pleading, warning. By the next morning, I realized I had no idea how to return home. No passport, no money, no phone. The black canvas bag that held everything that tied me to my life, to my identity, was gone. And then the memory of Grace's polite, calculated voice echoed in my mind. Better to travel light. It wasn't travel, it was abandonment, murder of trust, executed with cold precision. Back in the police station, my thoughts oscillated between panic and anger. The young officer typing away on that ancient typewriter treated me with suspicion. I had become an object of doubt, a potential scam artist. I tried to explain. My children. They left me. On purpose. But the words choked in my throat. Could I prove it? How do you prove betrayal when all evidence lies in absent ownership, in empty cabins, in memories of smiles too bright to be true? Then Elena arrived. She carried the weight of belief. She had been shopping in the same market, seen everything, and had followed the trail to the police station. She handed over my black canvas bag, everything intact, as though it had been waiting for a savior, and in her eyes I saw understanding, compassion, and resolve. Not pity, but human recognition. For the first time I felt something resembling relief. Someone saw me. Someone understood that this wasn't a story I had concocted. Someone recognized that a 78-year-old man, a lifetime builder of ships and a giver of livelihoods, had been cruelly discarded by the very people he loved. As I sat there, the fly crawling lazily across the window frame, I realized the enormity of the betrayal. Sarah had smiled in the morning sun. Grace had polished her voice with icy precision, and Marcus, my own son, had played the part of an orchestrator behind closed doors. The humiliation wasn't just abandonment. It was deliberate, methodical, and entirely unnecessary. I recalled my life in Houston, my years running the largest shipyard in the city. I had built vessels that sailed across the Caribbean, carried cargo, dreams, and passengers safely. I had employed over 200 men, ensured their families were fed, their children educated, their dignity intact. I had built empires and bridges, both literal and metaphorical. Yet none of that mattered here in this foreign port, in this tiny plastic chair, staring at an old fly and an ancient typewriter. My legacy felt like ashes in my hands. Elena spoke softly, pulling me back from the abyss of despair. She explained that the officer would file a report, contact the American embassy, and reach out to the cruise company. She offered her phone, her social media, her presence, and for the first time, I understood that while my children had abandoned me, the world had not. Not entirely. Compassion existed, even if in unexpected forms. As the officer began typing the report, I allowed myself a single shaky breath. The betrayal was still real. The abandonment was still there, gnawing at my bones. But there was a sliver of hope, a thin thread of possibility that justice, or at least acknowledgement, could follow. And for a man who had faced storms, hurricanes, and shipwrecks, I recognized something familiar stirring in my chest. Determination. Even in betrayal, even in despair, an old sea dog knows the tides, reads the winds, and finds a way to navigate back home. The fluorescent light above flickered, buzzing intermittently like an anxious heartbeat, casting uneven shadows across the grimy walls of the Cartagena police station. For the first 2 days, I had felt invisible, like a ghost haunting the edge of the world, unseen and unheard. But then Elena appeared, like a sudden beam of light in the darkness, and everything shifted. She was older than I had first assumed, perhaps in her late 60s, but moved with a quiet energy that suggested she had long ago learned the power of observation. Her gray hair, cut short, framed a face lined with wisdom and empathy, and her sunglasses, dark and oversized, seemed to shield her from the world. But when she removed them as she entered the station, her eyes met mine, and for the first time in 48 hours, I felt seen. Not pitied, not doubted, seen. I saw everything, she said softly, her voice calm but deliberate. Your daughter went into the market, and then you tried to follow her. You asked people, you ran, you searched, I watched, and I realized someone needs to help you. Her words struck me like waves crashing against a cliff. She had noticed, she had understood. In the cacophony of Cartagena's streets, in the blur of sweat, noise, and confusion, someone had witnessed my despair and chosen to act. Elena handed over my black canvas bag, my passport, my wallet with the torn $200, the cell phone, and the documents from Josephine's will. Each item was a lifeline, a tangible connection to the life my children had tried to erase from existence. The weight of it all in my hands was almost unbearable. I could barely breathe, could barely believe that it wasn't too late. I didn't know your family would do this, she continued, sitting beside me on another green plastic chair. I just, I couldn't leave you there. She held out her hand, placing it gently on my arm. The contact was simple, human, but it carried warmth, compassion, and reassurance. The kind of connection I hadn't felt since the betrayal. I tried to speak, tried to thank her, but my voice failed me. 2 days of fear, hunger, confusion, and shame had choked every word in my throat. Instead, I nodded, my eyes fixed on the tiny fly crawling along the edge of the window, as if it were a talisman of some fragile hope. Elena pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts, messaging, and then stopped, her face intent. I have about 8,000 followers, she said. It's not much, but maybe someone can help. Maybe someone can reach your family or the authorities faster than we can. Social media. Josephine and I had never really used it. We had accounts, sure, but never touched them, never understood them. Yet now, in this station in a foreign country, it seemed like a lifeline. Do whatever you think is necessary, I croaked. My voice sounded alien to me, dry and hoarse-like, the result of dehydration and the past 2 days' torment. She began typing rapidly, the screen illuminating her face, her fingers moving with precision. I watched her, mesmerized, as though observing magic in motion. Pictures of me in the market, of the quay, of the empty streets, uploaded alongside her words describing the abandonment. She painted the truth in stark, undeniable terms. A 78-year-old man stranded by his own family, abandoned in a foreign port. The officer, who had been skeptical only moments before, now leaned forward, interest piqued. His fingers paused over the typewriter as he studied the phone screen, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. Elena's compassion was contagious. The officer's eyes softened, his skepticism replaced by respect. This was no hoax. This was real. Very serious, he muttered. His voice clipped but tinged with concern. This man was intentionally abandoned. Someone has to do something. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a mix of relief and shame. Relief that someone believed me. Shame that the world would now know my children's cruelty. And yet, amidst this mixture of emotions, there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in 2 days. Hope. Elena stayed beside me, her presence a stabilizing force. You are not alone, she said softly. I'm going to stay here until this is resolved. Her words were simple, but they anchored me. They reminded me that even in the darkest hour there could be light, there could be kindness, there could be humanity. As the officer began the formal process of filing a report, contacting the American embassy, and coordinating with the cruise company, I allowed myself to think beyond the immediate horror. I could almost imagine the Star of the Caribbean sailing away with my children on board, blissfully unaware of the storm they had unleashed. But thanks to Elena, thanks to her compassion and initiative, the storm would not go unnoticed. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting memories of my life wash over me. The Houston shipyard, the vessels I had built, the hundreds of men I had employed, the families I had supported. They all came rushing back. I had given a lifetime to others, and now, even in betrayal, I found that humanity could give back, unexpectedly, through strangers who chose to act. The hours passed slowly. The clock on the wall ticked, almost painfully, marking each second since my abandonment. Yet with each tick, I felt a growing determination. My children had left me for dead in a foreign port. They had tried to erase me, to humiliate me, but I was still here. My voice, though weakened, could still be heard. My story, though painful, could still be told. Elena's phone continued to buzz with responses, messages of concern, and offers of help from strangers who had seen her posts. The officer typed reports, communicated with superiors, and for the first time I felt the machinery of justice beginning to move. Slowly, surely, the world recognized that I was not invisible, that I had been wronged, and that my dignity mattered. And as I sat there, the hard plastic digging into my aging bones, I realized something fundamental. The betrayal of my children, though cruel and devastating, had not defined me. It had not destroyed the life I had built, the legacy I had created, or the man I had always been. It had tested me, yes, but it had also revealed something deeper: the kindness of strangers, the persistence of justice, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. For the first time in 2 days, I allowed myself to breathe, to hope, to believe that I might not only survive this ordeal, but reclaim some measure of dignity, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. And somewhere in the depths of my heart, I felt the stirrings of a quiet determination. I would not let this go unanswered. I would find a way to confront the cruelty that had left me stranded, to face those who had abandoned me, and to reclaim not just my belongings, but my honor, my identity, and the respect I deserved. For the first time, I understood that even in abandonment, even in betrayal, even in the face of overwhelming despair, there could still be allies, still be compassion, still be hope. And that realization, fragile though it was, became the anchor I clung to as the hours stretched on in that small, flickering police station in Cartagena. Time seemed to stretch like molten wax in the Cartagena police station. Each second was a reminder of my abandonment. Each tick of the clock, a silent accusation. 48 hours had passed since I had been left on that foreign shore. And now, thanks to Elena's unwavering determination, the machinery of justice was slowly moving. For the first time, I felt a fragile sense that the wrong done to me might be acknowledged, that the betrayal could be addressed, and perhaps even punished. Elena had taken the lead. She had photographed everything, documented my appearance, my belongings, the streets I had wandered, the market where my family had executed their plan. Her phone, small and pink, became a lifeline. Each post, each message, each share expanded my story beyond the narrow walls of the police station, beyond the bustling streets of Cartagena, out into the world. The young officer, once skeptical, now leaned over his typewriter with renewed focus. His fingers clacked against the keys in a rhythm that was almost soothing, each click a tiny affirmation that my complaint was being formalized, that my words were no longer falling on deaf ears. "We will contact the American Embassy," he said, finally looking up from the paper. "We will file a full report with the cruise company. This is serious. Someone abandoned a man intentionally. This cannot be ignored." I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight as steel bands. The lump there had grown the size of a fist, choking my words before they could form. Instead, I simply nodded, letting Elena's presence speak for me. Her hand rested lightly on mine, the warmth of it grounding me, reminding me that though my children had failed me, the world had not. The officer continued typing, detailing my account of the events. My departure from the ship, the intentional abandonment, the items left behind, the sum of cash, the documents entrusted to my care, and the precise, calculated manner in which my family had executed their plan. Each word on that typewritten page was a small victory, a first step toward reclaiming not just my belongings, but my dignity. Elena leaned closer, whispering softly, "Mr. Julian, can we search for the cruise line online? Maybe there's a way to contact the company directly." Her voice carried hope, but also urgency. Time was critical. The Star of the Caribbean was already sailing further away, and each passing hour increased the risk that my children's actions would remain unchallenged. The police officer nodded, turning to an old desktop computer that hummed and creaked, as if protesting the sudden demands placed upon it. Pages loaded slowly, the internet crawling, but eventually we found the official website of the cruise line. Contact forms, customer service numbers, and executive emails filled the screen. Elena typed quickly, drafting a message that would alert the company to the abandonment, detailing the seriousness of the situation and demanding immediate action. I watched her, fascinated by her efficiency. She was tireless, relentless, refusing to let bureaucracy or skepticism slow her down. She called the customer service line multiple times, speaking with agents who initially sounded unsure, confused by the gravity of the claim. But Elena persisted. Each call, each email, each message built momentum, a wave of pressure that would be impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, I allowed myself small moments of reflection, memories of a life once abandoned and secure. I saw the shipyards of Houston, the hundreds of men I had employed, the vessels I had built that sailed across oceans. I remembered Josephine, her quiet strength, her unwavering support. I remembered Mason's small, fearful face as he whispered his warning on the deck of the cruise ship. And I understood painfully that my children had chosen betrayal over love, convenience over loyalty, selfishness over family. The day stretched into evening, the humid air of Cartagena clinging to my skin. I felt every ache in my bones, every sting of sunburn, every pang of hunger and fatigue. But beneath it all was a quiet, burning determination. I would not be dismissed. I would not be erased. I would see this through, not for revenge, but for justice, for truth, for the dignity that my children had tried to strip from me. Elena's phone buzzed constantly. Messages poured in from strangers who had seen her social media posts, some offering assistance, some expressing outrage, and some promising to contact the embassy or the cruise company. I felt a strange mixture of shame and gratitude. Shame that the world now knew my children's cruelty. Gratitude that the world cared, that strangers could act where my family would not. By late afternoon, the officer returned with news that lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The cruise ship, the Star of the Caribbean, had departed Cartagena 48 hours ago and was scheduled to stop in Panama before returning to Houston in 5 days. 5 days. 5 days during which my children would continue their lives in comfort, blissfully unaware of the storm they had unleashed. 5 days during which I would sit here in this small plastic chair, waiting, planning, and preparing. Elena's presence was a balm to my frayed nerves. She stayed beside me, her hand on mine, her calm voice a reminder that I was not alone. "We will see this through," she said firmly. "They will not get away with this. You will be heard, Mr. Julian." I allowed myself a single shaky breath, imagining the confrontation to come. My children had abandoned me, but I was not powerless. They had underestimated the resilience of a man who had faced storms at sea, who had built empires from nothing, who had devoted a lifetime to others. I would confront them. I would reclaim what was mine, not just my possessions, but my dignity, my identity, my voice. And as I sat there, the typewriter clacking, the fly crawling along the windowsill, and Elena typing messages on her phone, I realized something profound. Betrayal could wound deeply, but it could also reveal truth. My children had shown their nature, yes, but the world had shown its own. Humanity, compassion, justice, all still existed, even in the unlikeliest of forms. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining myself back on the ship, facing the people who had forsaken me. The anger, the hurt, the shame, all of it coalesced into something fierce and unyielding. I would not be dismissed. I would not be ignored. I would not let the final act of my children's cruelty define the final chapters of my life. I was Julian Morgan Reed, 78 years old, shipbuilder, father, grandfather, betrayed, yes, but not defeated. And as Elena's presence and the officer's diligence worked together, I understood that justice, like the tides I had long studied, could be summoned, controlled, and eventually it would rise. The next 5 days would be critical. Plans would be made, messages would be delivered, and the world would bear witness to a betrayal that should never have happened. And in those 5 days, I resolved to prepare not just to survive, but to reclaim the respect and dignity that was my right. The hours in the Cartagena police station passed slowly, almost suspended in time, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. I sat on the same green plastic chair, my aging body aching, my white linen shirt wrinkled and stained, and yet something inside me had shifted. Elena remained beside me, a quiet anchor in the storm of my emotions, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a tentative spark of hope. The police officer had filed the report, contacted the American embassy, and reached out to the Star of the Caribbean's management. Messages and calls had been sent to alert them to the abandonment, and the gravity of the situation was now officially recognized. The cruise line, obligated by law and ethics, could no longer ignore the deliberate abandonment of a 78-year-old man by his own family. Elena sat quietly, scrolling through her phone, posting updates, responding to messages of support from strangers who had witnessed the story online. Their words of outrage, concern, and encouragement formed an invisible shield around me, reminding me that I was not alone. Even across thousands of miles, the world had acknowledged my existence, my suffering, and my dignity. I allowed myself to breathe, to think, and to reflect. My mind drifted back to my life in Houston, to the shipyard I had built from the ground up. I remembered the ships that had sailed across the Caribbean, carrying cargo, passengers, and dreams. I remembered the hundreds of men I had employed, the families I had supported, the lives I had touched with fairness and integrity. And I realized that no act of betrayal, however cruel, could erase a lifetime of contribution, of love, or of purpose. Mason's warning came to me again, the whispered plea on the deck of the cruise ship. He had known. Somehow he had seen the danger and tried, in his small, powerless way, to prevent it. My grandson's insight, his courage, even in fear, filled me with a mixture of sorrow and pride. He had acted in the only way he could, and I vowed silently that I would honor that warning by facing the betrayal with dignity and resolve. The fly crawled along the windowsill, oblivious to the gravity of the world within the station. The typewriter clacked steadily, recording the events in precise detail. Elena's presence remained constant, her calm energy a contrast to the chaos and despair that had filled the past 48 hours. I began to see a path forward, a way to reclaim not just my belongings, but my voice, my identity, and my dignity. By late afternoon, news arrived that the cruise ship was on its way to Panama, with a scheduled return to Houston in 5 days. 5 days. 5 days during which my children would continue their lives in comfort, while I remained here waiting, planning, and preparing. It was infuriating, humiliating, and yet it offered an opportunity, a chance to gather allies, organize support, and confront the betrayal with the weight of truth behind me. Elena had connected me with several people online who had seen her posts. Some were lawyers, others were journalists, and many were simply compassionate strangers outraged by the injustice. They offered advice, resources, and guidance on how to navigate the legal and bureaucratic maze ahead. For the first time, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was no longer entirely at the mercy of my children's cruelty. We began to strategize. Calls were made, emails drafted, and plans laid for my eventual return. The embassy had been notified, the cruise line had acknowledged the incident, and legal avenues were being explored. Every step taken was a small victory, a reaffirmation that abandonment did not have to mean defeat. As the hours waned, I allowed myself to imagine the confrontation to come. I saw myself aboard the Star of the Caribbean, standing tall, voice steady, addressing the children who had abandoned me. I imagined the look of shock and guilt on their faces when they realized the magnitude of their actions and the consequences that followed. I imagined reclaiming not just my belongings, but the respect and recognition that was my right. But amidst the planning and anticipation, there was also reflection. I thought of Josephine, her quiet strength, her unwavering support, and the life we had built together. I thought of Mason and the subtle ways he had tried to protect me. I realized that even in betrayal, there were bonds that remained unbroken. Love that could not be discarded, loyalty that could not be erased, and courage that could not be silenced. Elena's hand on mine reminded me that kindness still existed in the world, even when family failed. The compassion she had shown, the tireless effort to help a stranger, became a symbol of hope that I clung to. In a world filled with cruelty and indifference, there were still individuals who chose to act with humanity, to stand up for what was right, and to restore dignity where it had been stripped away. I allowed myself a small smile, fragile but real. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm. The storm of betrayal was not over, but the winds had shifted. I was no longer entirely alone. I had allies, witnesses, and a plan. I had the law, compassion, and a growing network of support. And most importantly, I had myself, the man who had faced storms at sea, who had built empires, and who refused to be diminished by the selfishness of his children. As night fell over Cartagena, the heat lingering in the humid air, I closed my eyes and imagined the days to come. I would face my children, not as a frightened old man, but as Julian Morgan Reed, a man who had given his life to others, who had endured betrayal, and who had discovered that hope and justice could emerge even from the depths of despair. The Star of the Caribbean would return to Houston, and when it did, so would I. Not to beg, not to plead, but to reclaim what had been taken from me, my belongings, my dignity, and my voice. I would confront the betrayal with the strength and clarity of a man who had endured the storm and survived. And as I sat there, the soft hum of the station around me, the typewriter silent for a brief moment, and Elena's steady presence beside me, I understood something profound. Abandonment may wound, betrayal may sting, but compassion, truth, and resilience could heal. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was clear. Justice would be sought, dignity would be reclaimed, and I would not be forgotten. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of Cartagena. The city hummed with life, oblivious to the quiet determination building inside a small police station. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the weight of my years, the scars of betrayal, and the spark of hope all at once. I was Julian Morgan Reed. Abandoned, yes, but not defeated. Forgotten, no. Alive, determined, and ready to reclaim the life that was rightfully mine. And in that moment, I realized the glimmer of hope was no longer fragile. It was a beacon, guiding me through the storm, lighting the path toward justice, reconciliation, and the restoration of dignity that every human being deserves.